He had breakfasted on a bit of beef jerky and washed it down with a bit of sweetened hot chocolate. Then he busied himself, cleaning out the hollow log where he had spent the night, doing his best to leave little sign of the previous night's occupation. Cradling his rifle in the crook of his arm, he stepped out quickly into the morning air. By his map, he had now crossed over into Kentucky, and the miles passed under his feet as if they were nothing. He could see a skeleton leaning against a tree atop a small rise. He was far off the main trail, and it is evident that the person had been there for some time undisturbed. He warily climbs the hill, all the time looking about for enemies. Approaching the still figure, he then crouches down to get a better look. There was dried matter all over the shirt, waistcoat, and breeches, and there was a large arrow shaft sticking out of the bony ribcage. Gingerly grabbing one shoulder, he firmly yanks the arrow free. The stone tip was still attached with sinew, and the entire arrow was gray and warped from the weather. Clearing out some of the early spring vegetation from around the figure, he decided that he should check the pockets for any identification, such as a letter or perhaps a monogram box. To his surprise, in the right pocket was a gold bracelet, crudely made. It was obvious the person hadn't been robbed after death. It was too small for his thick wrists, and so he set it aside. In the other pocket, he pulled out a small pocket pistol. It was surprisingly clean for having been in the pocket so long, and so he looked at it. The charge was no good. And then gingerly tried the lock. It must have been well greased because it clicked smoothly and true. He released the lock and laid the pistol down. There was nothing in the other pocket or the waistcoat pocket. There was no rifle, no powder horn, hunting pouch, or other accoutrements around. The man must have been wounded and ran away from his attackers with only the items that he had in his pockets. So he pocketed the pistol and stowed the bracelet in his haversack. A sigh escaped him as he gazed down at the forlorn figure. He removed his hat and said a prayer for the unknown man's family as well as for himself, that he would not become such a casualty of the wilderness. Not sure of what to do next, he looked around again. He spotted a faint trail in front of him and decided to follow it. After a mile or so down the trail, his spirits began to lift again. It was a very old trail, and only the faint tracks of deer could be seen upon it. All was going to be well. However, suddenly, he spotted something in the distance. It was a faded, rust-colored teepee. Raising his rifle to the ready, he looked around a bit more. and so he stealthily crept forward, keeping his sights trained on the structure as he slowly approached. As he walked ever closer, he continued to keep a close eye on his surroundings and strained his ears for any unusual sound. It looked long abandoned. It was nothing, so he lowered his rifle. Inside there had been 2 flat rocks stacked. That made him a bit curious. So after a moment, he reached inside. Underneath, he found a folded piece of old paper. It was difficult to read in the dim light of the tent, so he stepped outside.
To who may find this? For 2 or more days I have been follered by Injuns. I think they be Chickasaw. Maybe 10 in their party by their tracks. I have hid my pack on my extra goods for safekeeping. Whoever find it, I pray he be a white man. Anyway, I have no family left, as they all died from the pox. Use these things for your own. Ephraim Kane, July 1792.
He refolded the paper and stowed it in his haversack. This must have been the camp of the man that he had found earlier. 2 years had passed since his death. Looking around, he decided that he would go looking for the man's cache. He was looking for a pile of rocks, an unusual tree formation, a hollow tree. Anything that would indicate some sort of sign that something had been placed there that was out of the ordinary. But all the places he searched were to no avail, and he came up empty-handed. And then suddenly, 100 yards from the camp, he saw something unusual, a stump with 2 crossed logs in the shape of an X. It seemed almost natural, but he decided to look closer anyway. Turning around then, he saw a hollow at the base of a large pignut hickory. The cache was so cleverly concealed that without the note, he could have passed by it 100 times without noticing. He squatted down on his haunches and began clearing away the leaves and bark that hid the man's possessions. He pulled out a tied bag of some sort and looked it over, brushing the 2 years of dust and dirt off of it. Then he did his best to replace the bark, as it was a good hiding place, and he didn't wish to draw attention to the spot. A place like this was a good thing to know. shouldered the bag and picked up his rifle. It was getting late in the day, and since the faded canvas was the only shelter around, he decided to spend the night there. After cleaning it up a bit, of course. He set his rifle down in the front entrance of the tent and put Ephraim Kane's sack down on the ground. He was getting quite thirsty, and cleaning up the camp would take some time. So he took a long drink, recorked it, and then set it down. After removing the rest of his gear, he set about readying the camp for habitation. There were several fallen branches around, and so he pulled them to one side, but he kept them close to hand as they would come in handy later for firewood. He saw a stick on the side of the tent, and as he cleaned off the top from the leaves and debris, he had an idea. He broke it down to a proper length, and then he used it to make a small clearing. As he was doing so, he found some large chunks of burned logs, probably from Ephraim Kane's last fire. He tossed these to the side. The tent was fastened in the front with a crude blanket pin at the top. There was also another small blanket pin at the middle, which hung unfastened. He fastened the middle pin and stood back to see how it looked. Not too bad. He unfastened both pins and then rolled the excess canvas around the pole tightly. Then he went to the nearby creek and brought back a flat, dry rock for a fire base. He made sure to pick a dry one, as a wet rock heated by a fire will sometimes explode with the heat. He then took some time arranging his gear in the entrance of the tent. However, he made sure to hang the powder horn and hunting pouch over the rifle muzzle, where he could seize it quickly, should he be attacked. Now for the contents of Ephraim Kane's cache. It was tied with some strips of leather. Carefully opening it and not wanting to pull off the fastening buttons, he eagerly anticipated what lay inside. The first item is a bit of burlap tied with another leather thong. Unrolling it, he finds some cloth. Something heavy inside. It's an iron cross with a string to hang it from. The cloth turns out to be a shirt. A pretty nice shirt. It must have been his town shirt, he surmised. The next item is a waxed canvas bag. And what do you know? It's a nice metal spoon. Next is a goodly amount of dried beans. That's a good find. Hope they're still good. And half a bottle of salt. That's always a valuable find. It had been wrapped in a piece of brain tan leather to prevent rattling and breakage, and then stuffed inside of a pewter tankard. The last item in the bag was a tin plate. A large burlap bag was next, and the first item he pulled out was a string haversack. That would be excellent for harvesting nuts and other wild edibles. Next is a small jar topped with a piece of rawhide. Opening it, seems to be filled with powder, which is probably some sort of flour. Unwrapping the next item, he is very pleasantly surprised to see that it is a small tin candle holder. This would be most useful. Still had a bit of a stub of candle left in it as well. The next item is a large and somewhat heavy brass box. Opening it, he finds a complete pocket fishing box. He had meant to put one together before leaving home, but his meager resources would not allow him the funds to do so. This was a find indeed. There's some extra leather laces as well. Always handy, and so he sets those aside. And then another hinged brass box, which when opened reveals itself to be flint and steel with some tow, and wonder of wonders, some sulfur splints. That would be excellent if they hadn't gotten too damp. Finally, he pulls out a ball bag, and taking the stopper off the top, he empties some of them into his hand. He can't be sure without comparison, but they seem to be the same caliber as his rifle. No matter, he can melt them down and re-pour them if necessary. At the very bottom of the knapsack, he finds a pair of almost new elk hide moccasins. Comparing them to his foot, they look close to the right size. He'll have to try them on later. Now to get a fire going. He makes sure to get plenty of sparks down inside the tinderbox. He's going to use one of the sulfur splints to see if they're still any good. He has a little trouble at first, but after a little blowing, he sees a telltale little blue flame lick up the small splint. Which then catches fire and begins to burn brightly. He closes the tin to preserve his char cloth, which is precious. He then holds a sulfur splint under his twigs, and soon they catch nicely. Now for some supper. He finds a bit of a stick, proper size, length, diameter, and he inserts it into the handle of his frying pan. He's very tired, so nothing complicated tonight. Just a simple cornmeal mush. He adds some water from his canteen. And then begins to knead the meal and mix it up with his fingers. Well, it needs a little bit more water. And now a little bit more cornmeal. After it reaches the right consistency, he places it on the coals. He stirs it now and then with a stick that he whittled and flattened out. He also adds a little precious salt from the salt horn. Now to sit back and breathe a prayer of gratitude for his meal, his good fortune, and his safety. Bit of a stick there. The hot mush is delicious, and he can feel its strength creeping into his weary body, bite by bite. The cool water from the canteen goes down nicely as well. His meal finished, he sits about to light the stub of Ephraim Cain's candle. Placing it on his haversack, he retrieves his precious paper and brass pencil. Tonight he will write a letter to his wife and family. The dead man that he found earlier and the deserted camp, looking forlorn and abandoned, as well as the many miles between him and his loved ones, weigh heavily upon his mind. My dearest wife and family, it has been almost 4 weeks since we said goodbye. The trail has been mostly uneventful, and I am well, as I pray is the case with all of you at home. It is night once more, and I miss you all more than ever. If it were not for the promise of a better day, I should have already speedily retraced my steps back to the warmth of hearth and kin. But I am resolute, and Providence has smiled on me this day with many blessings. I shall regale you with the details when we meet again. I hope to send this to you by post when I reach Logan Station, where I expect to join with the Cumberland Trail. I will lay over there some days and hopefully trade and resupply. Until I am able to write again, I remain forever yours, James Bender. April 29th in the year of our Lord, 1794. With that, he leans over and blows out the candle. And then he puts on his nightcap for sleeping. He retrieves his rifle and its accoutrements and places them under the safety of the tent, close to hand and away from the dew. After laying down, he reaches over and brings his tomahawk closer, and then arranges it next to him, where he could quickly grasp it. He falls asleep that night with a silent prayer for the soul of Ephraim Cain.